Hi, our guest today is William Buckley, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen in Milford. My co-host Al Holman is not here today. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
Wanted to get you in before we start doing all the candidate shows to just talk about what's going on in the Board of Selectmen. And I think the biggest news since the holiday season is that in your ongoing negotiations with the Milford Water Company, the mediator came up with a price that's acceptable to both parties.
Yeah, so basically what we have is an agreement in principle.
There are a lot of details to be worked out.
Right, so many details, it's amazing. So we continue to do that. We continue to work with the mediator. We continue to work with our consultants and town council who are working directly with the water company.
A little bit premature then to have said there'd be a town meeting in March.
Well, it all depends. There may be opportunities to get that done that fast, but you know, with so many moving parts, information becomes available. We may want to reconsider that. It's likely we'll reconsider that. What's more important out of this is that, you know, the process has gone a couple of years where we've begun negotiations, talked, and brought in a mediator.
Well, let me go back. The premise was that the current rate structure would cover the cost of the town acquiring the company and running it.
Yeah, that's basically been the board's position all along, and our starting position is that, you know, if we couldn't make it rate neutral, if there was a requirement to drive up rates in order to make the acquisition, then it wasn't something we wanted to pursue.
Okay, and I understand all parties are under a, I don't want to say gag order, but are under a non-disclosure agreement. So you can't really talk about the negotiations, so I'm not going to try to put you on the spot and do that. But suffice to say, at some point in 2017, there will be a town meeting for town meeting members to take a vote on accepting this.
If we can polish up these last details, that's exactly my hope. It's my hope to be able to bring this to town meeting members, to allow them to become informed, to decide where they stand on it.
And the purpose is basically greater control and
it's really accountability for me.
That's the word I was searching for in my head is people will actually be calling a town official to complain if they have a complaint, and they will get a response.
Right, it's always been important to me to, when we looked at this deal, to make sure that there was accountability aspect. That may not always be there when you're calling the Milford Water Company, or any utility for that matter. I want to single out the Milford Water Company. We know sometimes what it's like dealing with the energy providers and gas companies. And so, and while they're not of that size, it can still feel that way. So certainly accountability is a piece. Rate neutral, in other words, if we've got to jack up the rates, it's a no-go. It's not something I want to bring forward to town meeting.
Just the way the sewer commission hasn't raised the rate in 9 years.
Yeah, and so
they took a big raise 9 years ago so that they could do some remedial work on the leaks in the pipes. But now that it's built in the budget, they have not had to raise the rates in 9 years.
Yeah, you know, I look at the sewer enterprise as a model for how we might want to structure ongoing operations.
An elected board of water commissioners?
Yeah,
something
you
like
know,
that?
I don't know where we're going appointed versus elected, appointed for some period of time, because, you know, day +1 when you acquire, the target date is still July 1st, the beginning of the municipality's first
And I would
fiscal year.
assume the town would rely on the existing personnel and maybe even the R.H. White infrastructure above that for a period of time to help everybody learn how to run this thing.
Well, certainly the employees are very important to me, and I
Right.
know important to the board.
And important to, they want to know if they have jobs too.
Yeah, and so, you know, that's why I caution people to not speculate on what's happening. You know, I'm mindful, having gone through acquisition myself, having been in a company that was acquired,
So was I.
The tremendous amount of change that employees go through. And let's start with when we were talking about acquisition of a company and what might happen to the employees, we're talking about their livelihood.
Right.
We're also talking about their benefits. What's the impact of their benefits? Will they have to change healthcare providers?
Their pension.
Do their children have some special needs where they may have to change providers or go to a different primary? All of these things represent an enormous amount of change and an enormous amount of stress on a family. So I'm mindful of that. We've got to try to have as little impact on the employees and their families as possible, while at the same time trying to guarantee the operation of the water company. Again, the Board of Selectmen don't know how to operate a water company. That's why, and neither did the people that are operating or are commissioners for the sewer department. So there's some learning that goes on.
You rely on the professionals.
Right. There's certainly some learning that goes on, and we've got to figure out how we want to structure this, how we want to organize.
Okay. Different note, I'm trying to think of other major issues. For the last couple of years, there was a lot of turnover in the information technology or IT department.
Right.
That seems to have stabilized in both the school and the town side, and a lot of progress being made. You happy with that?
I am. So there's been a lot of things that have been happening. I think the Board of Selectmen have been focused on in the reorganization and distribution of resource and workload.
Well, it's $100 million, I don't want to say business, it's a $100 million year operation.
Right, it's
The
a
town
$100 million
government.
budget. From an from an asset standpoint, this community owns what I would consider probably over $1 billion in assets.
The buildings, the parks,
The land.
the land, and the town's being structured that way. I mean, in the last 2 years, you got a finance director and really a big, strong finance department.
Right, we reorganized that finance department where previously we had just a town accountant, separate town treasurer, and separate collections office.
They were all under one.
We've brought that under Zach Taylor, who's done a tremendous job.
And IT is also under him.
Right, we redirected the IT efforts to make sure that it be given its focus. Zach, from a finance director standpoint, owns the majority of enterprise-wide software, payroll software, and all of
Right.
that. So he has a vested interest in making sure that that IT function works well.
Okay, in the last year, you've set job review standards, excuse me, and given the town administrator a set of goals to meet. That's a first in as long as I've been involved in Milford town government.
Right, so I come from a private sector background, and something that is enormously helpful to employees is setting up of goals, review of that performance so that somebody has the opportunity to be successful and succeed in the eyes of all three members. So with three members contributing to that, the director's goals, the administrator, town administrator,
Right.
also contributing to those goals, then what you're doing is seeking a mutual understanding of what we're going to work on.
Right, but it also gets the administrator and the individual board members out of a hot seat of, oh, he's picking on him.
Right.
Or because
Right.
you're all agreed on where he's supposed to go.
Yeah, and I don't know what's hard about that. I don't know why it's been so difficult to get in place. You know that when we did that...
I think it's hard for government to adopt some of the things that are done in private industry because governments, you hear can't be run as a business or it's different. But in terms of structure, I firmly believe it can be.
I think it can too. That's why we extended it beyond just the town administrator. All department heads will be receiving performance evaluations, the setting up of goals, same thing. Rick will be responsible for that. Rick Malani is the town administrator.
Yeah.
And all department heads will be getting feedback.
No, I know when you brought it up, it was, well, you're out to get him and fire him.
Yeah, I think, hey, we just talked about the change with the water company and the impact it can have on employees. Any time senior management implements change, there can be stress within the organization. And frankly, I understand sometimes why people don't like that change.
Well, nobody likes change.
As CEOs, for lack of a better term, it's our job to sometimes stress the organization.
Well, the problem is, and you've mentioned it, it's not like private business where a boss takes you behind the door and you hash out changes. This is done in public meetings.
Right, so the best way to accomplish that is to clear the air sometimes and get to the performance evaluations and get to something that everybody can work with. But I get why employees are not going to always like their boss. I don't struggle with that. I've sometimes left my work and not been happy with my boss. The unique aspect here is that if somebody doesn't like their boss, they can run against them, and that's some of the interesting aspects and dynamics of municipal government.
Since you brought up the election season, I'm trying to stay away from the
Sure,
candidate issues because we're going to give you and your opponent equal shows to talk about why you're running.
Sure.
Let's go back to one issue though. Last year's Selectmen campaign, personally, I think crossed the line into some nastiness. Whether you want to call it, dirty tactics, whatever. You had some mailings going out by one candidate that were pretty harsh. You had some comments made, not by the candidate actually, but by the radio newscaster.
Yes,
about a local restaurant
that
that you happen to
right.
Occasionally enjoy a meal at, you and Selectman Kincaid. Do you see a place? It looks at a place in a small local government race, candidly. You expect it in a presidential race, they're going to go some mudslinging, and certainly we saw that last November. Do you see a place? Am I wrong, or should that just be, off limits in a local race?
Well, candidates and community standards have to decide that. I have tremendous faith in Milford that when they see a negative campaign, they're going to not react favorably to it. I don't get any sense that this community reacts well to negative campaigning. I expect and have already seen instances where this upcoming season is likely to be very negative. I'm disappointed. I intend to run a race where, I just intend to be positive and talk about my accomplishments.
You're going to ask or try to convey to other candidates to take the high road?
I would, I would remind candidates throughout a process like this that, this is a job for serious people. We have serious work to do. When we're talking about acquisition of a $63 million water company, the bonding of that, the complications and tax implications, the liabilities, they need to get serious and they need to understand that it's not a time to snipe at one another. We're supposed to be doing this for the best interests of the community. And whether it's a $61 million school building that I worked 15 years to help make sure that it came about, I'm very proud of. Again, if I list the top 100 things that would keep me up at night, I'm thinking about public safety. I'm thinking about the quality of water. I'm thinking about those things that are far more important to our community than what Joe says about Mary or said about Steve.
But the other thing, when negative things are said, most of the candidates have families in town. And I know you have, your grandchildren are too young to read stuff. They might hear it, but your daughter lives in town. Mm-hmm. It's hard on families hearing things. It's one thing saying, I don't like the way you voted on that.
Sure.
It's another thing to hear people really get down and invent something.
Yeah, I suppose that's the hardest part about it, right, is that our children have to read it. Things on social media stay there forever, our grandkids and their grandkids.
You know where I'm going. There's a comment that I saw on social media about you.
Yes, I've seen that. I've been alerted to that.
That I don't really want to give it credence by repeating it, but let's just say it says you're part of an organization that's not very nice to minorities.
Right.
And I'm not even going to ask you about the truth of it because I don't think that does, I think it lowers journalism in the town to ask.
I agree.
I really do. But it's up there. And a recent survey I just read said about 52% of Americans have these bizarre perceptions about candidates.
Sure.
Hillary Clinton runs a child prostitute center out of a dry cleaning store in D.C. 52% of Americans believe that.
Wow, that's scary.
So if you carry that forward, 52% could believe you are a
I would
member
tell
of
you,
that group.
I have more faith in the community of Milford. I was born here. People have seen my record. They know where I stand on a lot of issues. I think people would characterize me as a data-driven person that asks for
process-driven too. You've described yourself as.
Yeah, and sometimes I'm tough on the process, and I get why that can challenge people to work harder, have more rigor in the delivery of data and information. I get that, and sometimes they're leaving town hall not happy that day. The question is when it rises to a level like the national level where somebody is a crook or somebody is a thief or somebody, was in Russia doing whatever. The fact of the matter is, when that creeps into local politics, that type of behavior,
Yeah.
Frankly, it's offensive, but it's disappointing. But I don't get a sense at all.
And last year it hurt a small business.
I don't think the community buys into that.
Yeah, and as I said, last year it hurt a small business in town.
Yeah, when radio people are talking about somebody's mother, or when they're talking about small businesses, or whatever the case may be, a lot of times in campaigns, I've noticed people that will go negative will look at things like that and just consider it collateral damage. As long as they splash something on the candidate, they're fine. Again, I intend to be positive. I've got a record. People have seen it. People know my family. People know my children and grandchildren.
Well, let's go back to get off that and
Sure.
go back to what do you see as? See, I'm trying to do it so it doesn't look like a political ad for you. I was going to say, what are the issues though that the board is grappling with right now?
Well, I think the board grapples with a great deal of things.
We talked about the water company.
Yeah.
We talked about performance reviews. You mentioned finances. You have the transportation pilot's been talked about,
Right.
whether you go for a second year on that or
Right.
you drop it now.
Yeah.
And EPA stormwater.
Yeah, EPA.
Depending on what
stormwater.
happens in Washington, that could be, if Washington does nothing with the EPA, that could be a huge burden to the town going forward. Or the House, Senate, and President all being in one party could erase the problem.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be middle ground, but
I've seen estimates that the challenge to Milford if the EPA guidelines go into effect and we have to comply fully, and our interpretation of it is correct, there are three numbers I've seen: 45 million, 70 million, and 100 million.
100 million was actually the number that
The former town engineer.
former town engineer Mike Santoro came up with,
That's
and
right.
it was borne out by an independent consultant later on.
It was.
But what's hard for people to grasp is we're talking about rainwater
Right. We're talking about the rain that falls on people's parking lots and roofs.
and making them pay for that.
We're talking about rain that has phosphorus in it as a result of combustion of gasoline engine and diesel engines.
Right. I drive my car home, the exhaust goes in the air. You can see it more in the winter months. It goes in the sky and stays there. The rain brings it down. It percolates into rivers and streams, and we want to get out of the water. Now, Milford's made actually a tremendous stride when you dredged Milford Pond.
Right.
You actually took a lot of the phosphorus levels out of there.
Yeah, if you take the organics out of the water, and certainly that layer of peat and plants that were there, you do a lot from the standpoint of the health of the water to make sure that phosphorus and the organic breakdown. I mean, that can be one of the downsides to phosphorus. Phosphorus is actually going to, it's what people put in their fertilizer to make their grass grow. It's the same thing that may choke out rivers and streams.
Right.
So by removing that, we make that Milford Pond a lot more healthy.
But the fact of the matter is, both the private property owners and the town itself, if these regulations are fully imposed, are going to be spending millions to try to clean this up.
Right, because what it does, the EPA puts a burden of properties with, I think it's either an acre and a half or 2 acres of parking lot plus roof.
Right.
So in combination, the roof and the parking lot will determine whether that business, if the EPA has their way, whether that business takes on additional burdens to make sure that phosphorus is reduced in our rivers and streams.
Right.
And frankly, it can put small businesses right out of business. There isn't any way that small businesses are going to be able to handle that kind of burden if the EPA has their way.
Okay. There's something else you've been juggling. Let's talk about the tax burden.
Mm-hmm.
This year, your board voted to adjust the business share up a few points so that businesses and homeowners would get the same percentage of increase.
Roughly, yeah.
Roughly, but it really basically meant the residents stayed
Yeah, so each year the
flat.
assessments change, and
Right.
you're probably more adept at this than I am, but each year assessments change, and as a result, the tax burden is shifted one way or another. So property values can go down in one segment of the population or one aspect or one group of homes or businesses, industrial, commercial, three-family, single-family, and all these different classifications can have a different impact. So we try to minimize the impact it's going to have on any one group. We've made adjustments the other way as well.
Okay.
But what I think we've been focused on as a board is on how to make sure we're maximizing our budget, how to make sure that we get returns on that people will call free cash, and how we can best allocate that free cash even back to the tax rate to reduce the tax burden.
And you're unique in that not only do you not tax to the legal limit that you're allowed to tax to,
Right.
You also give money back every year, which doesn't lower somebody's bill. It means it doesn't go as high as it could have gone.
Right, it means that government is not growing just because it can, just because it's allowed to tax further.
Right.
It means we don't grow when we stay below our levy
I mean,
capacity.
the best way of just describing it to people is under Prop 2.5, let's say you're allowed to raise $3 million more next year than you did this year, and you guys decide we'll only do 250
Right.
of it.
Yeah, what it means is we're not doing it because we can. I know when I first started on the Board of Selectmen, there were people, and I tried to argue that if you don't need it, you don't go after it.
Right.
I remember the conversations at the time, FinCom, Board of Selectmen members. It was a struggle to argue this through, because their argument was you're leaving something on the table. You're leaving money on the table. Well, the fact of the matter is it's not our money and it's not our table. So if you don't need it,
Right.
Their argument is sock it away, and that's great. You can sock it away enough that people are taxed out of their primary homes, when people that are making decisions might in fact have two homes. They're
Right.
not worried about losing the primary home, and they're not worried about losing their second home, but they're making decisions for a larger tax base of seniors, fixed income, homesteads where people have lived for multiple generations.
Well, in my neighboring town of Mendon, I describe it all the time as people making six-figure salaries are making tax decisions for people living on fixed incomes.
Exactly. You look at people living below the poverty line, and I would tell you this, right? When you see your entire Board of Selectmen driving Mercedes and having two homes and having a home in Florida and a home in Milford, I would hold on to your wallet. So, look to the people that are guiding you, they're making decisions for you, and see if, they live so well that, these tax rate increases are nothing. I think, when we look at Milford, let's talk about the uniqueness of Milford. I would defy anybody to find a community that's as well situated financially, has as high a bond rating in combination with available.
You definitely have more cash than any other town in the area.
Right, so we have a good stabilization fund to offset any major issues that come up. We're below the levy capacity on how much we can tax. We've not gone to that ceiling. We return money back to the tax rate. There's a whole host of financial reasons why.
And you have an awfully good tax base.
We have a great tax base, but we're stressing the small business owners. We're stressing the homeowners. So
Right.
there's always more work we can do. But more importantly, a lot of people would look at a town like that and say there must be shortcomings as they relate to their infrastructure, because there's no way they're funding their infrastructure and in that financial situation. If you neglect your infrastructure, it's a way to put money away, right? If I don't replace the furnace at home and the roof on my house and put money in the bank.
I don't see that. You've got a well-thought-out capital plan.
Yeah, we've got a well-thought-out capital plan, and when you look at our infrastructure and ask yourself, in the next 5 years, what will our police department need? It's been recently built out. It has weight rooms, it has interrogation rooms, it has the camera system, security systems, it has a firing range so that police officers can remain qualified with their weapons. When we look at the fire department, there's recent build out there. They have everything they need.
Including a new ladder truck on the way.
A new ladder truck.
Paid for with cash, by the way.
Right. I defy any community to talk about building a $61 million building and not impacting their operating budget and doing it without a tax override. The thing I'm most proud about is since Proposition 2.5, this community has never had a tax override. And look around you to see look at other communities.
You're preaching to a guy who everything in our town is funded by an override.
Yeah, so we're fortunate in a lot of
Yeah.
ways in that we have a strong tax base, but I'm also mindful of the fact that the people we stress when we increase taxes as well.
Okay. The other thing you're grappling with in your last meeting, the town council came in, is what to do with the public sale of marijuana. You've got a bunch of options. Fortunately, you've got about 2 years to weigh them in.
Right.
From outright ban to limiting the number to zoning them in certain areas. But as both you and Selectman Kincaid said recently, still following the will of the people in
Right.
that ballot question of allowing it.
Yeah, and how we feel personally about things may have less to do with what the community standard is. The referendum allowed for communities to opt in or out of the sale of marijuana. And so the question for the Board of Selectmen in going forward is, what's the will of the people? How do we
And it only
assess
passed
that?
roughly 50-50 in Milford.
Right, and the real question was, do we allow the sale of marijuana in Massachusetts? Now the question for the community is, to what extent do you want it?
Do you want 20 head shops on Main Street?
No, well, to what extent do you want it in your town at all?
Well, your options are none,
Right,
2 or 3,
or unlimited.
unlimited, and then also in what zoning areas.
Right. So for me, the thing I've got to get a handle on is, to what extent were a percentage of those voters saying, hey, look, I'm okay with legal marijuana, recreational marijuana, but I really don't want it in my town. I cited a figure in the meeting the other night where I talked about Colorado, and everybody looks at Colorado as the first to have knocked down that barrier as it related to marijuana use and sale. And even 70% of their communities don't participate in the recreational sale or the retail sale of marijuana. So,
And I have to tell you, candidly, after that passed, my son and I were spent 2 days driving through Colorado on a trip from California back to the East Coast. We went looking just to see what they would look like, not to buy,
Right.
but just to see what they would look
did
like.
you find one?
No, we couldn't find them.
Right.
And we were in downtown Denver looking.
Right, so here's what I'm absolutely certain about. While I'm certain that a percentage of the Milford voters have no issue with the personal growth of marijuana or the retail sale of it or its use, what I'm certain about is that the community doesn't want Milford to be the marijuana capital of its region or the state in terms of sales. So,
Nor do they probably want a sale shop located, let's say, near Stacy Middle School.
right. There are certain guidelines,
Yeah.
community standards that we're going to implement through zoning, as you said.
Okay.
So having one next to, Stacy Middle School, which just wouldn't make sense for a lot of people. I think the community standard is something different.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot. Believe it or not, we're out of time.
It's amazing.
We'll
how
have
fast
you
this
back
goes.
for the why are you running for re-election, along with your opponent and the candidates for the 2-year seat for selectmen. But thanks for coming
Great.
in and,
I look
and
forward
just
to
going
that.
over these other issues.
No, anytime, Kevin,
Okay.
as you know.
Thanks.